quote you something to begin. There was a person whose work I liked a great deal by the name of R.H. Tawney. And this is a quote that I found in one of his books, though it may have come from someone else. I'm not sure, but he said this. He's quoting a very large mammal. Okay, he says, "God for us all, and every man for himself," said the elephant as he danced among the chickens. Okay, that kind of characterizes something of what I want to talk with you about tonight. Let me put it this way. Of course, when you start talking about a critique of capitalism, you could talk endlessly, obviously, and some of you have heard me preach, so you don't want me to do that again. But I want to look at some of the key problems, such as the inequities of wealth and income, the concentrations of power in a market that's supposed to be a free market, the threat that capitalism poses to democracy, and the concept of the free autonomous individual that lies at the heart of capitalist discourse, language, talk, etc. So those are some of the things we'll talk about. We'll see how far we can get. I hope to be able to address those in just the first 50 minutes of our time together, and leave 40 minutes, I hope, for you to make your own comments, raise questions, whatever. Let me say something that I think doesn't get enough attention. And it's the idea that in a free market, you have these free, autonomous individuals who pursue their self-interest. And that's a basic claim in a great deal of capitalist writing. I'm going to use the word discourse. It's a different word than ideology. Is not as loaded a term. Okay, and while I will be very critical of capitalism, I'll try to use, as I can, less loaded terms. Okay, so it's a way of talking about, writing about something. So discourse in that sense. I am very much indebted to a philosopher by the name of Alasdair MacIntyre, who is one of the best philosophers we've got in the United States. He sharply questions this free autonomous individual. I don't know if you've read much of the nation state work, going back to people like Hobbes and Locke and so on. But what they talked about is how free individuals come together to form a contract around the state, and that the state is entered into by these individuals. Now, what's interesting about this kind of language and this concept is that they see the individual as prior to community, all right? And they see the individual as self-interested, in pursuing one's self-interest rationally and so forth. They see the individual, I'm repeating myself, as rational, and they see society and the state as a social contract into which a person enters, okay? And then the invisible hand of the free market. And by the way, you don't need to take notes. If you want them, I'll send you my notes of this when we're done. Okay, so you can see what I'm looking at. So don't worry about that. But they see the invisible hand of the free market. This goes back to Adam Smith. He argued that when you have all these rational individuals pursuing their self-interest in a free market, that these invisible hands seem to go to work and produce the greatest good for the greatest number. Okay, so that's the invisible hand of the free market. Basically, this view sees society, this is MacIntyre again, as a collection of strangers, each pursuing his own interests under minimal constraints. And what they believe here, what they argue here, is that entry into social life is a voluntary act by potential rational individuals who ask, what kind of social contract is it reasonable for me to enter into? Now, there's more, but let me just work with that for a bit. MacIntyre is very much against that kind of ontological individualism. Let me ask you, the people in the room, did you ever exist as an individual? Um, were you just suddenly forming contracts with people somehow shortly after your birth? That kind of individual, McIntyre would suggest, and I would agree, is that the individual is not prior to community. In fact, the human self or subject is profoundly social. Even conception is a social act. And somebody says, well, now we can do artificial insemination. You talk about a social act there. Think of all the technology and the people and the rest it takes to get something like that going. So the contention is that the individual is not prior to community. That is a fiction, all right? And McIntyre calls it an ideological fiction. He says, and this is consistent with his philosophy, it does not take into account the historical narrative character of human life. I don't know about you, but when you ask me who I am, I don't tell you that, well, I'm this rational individual that came really into the world and began to make an awful lot of contracts that were consistent with my self-interest. I don't know about you. I don't do that. I'm going to talk about Mississippi. I'm going to talk about mama and daddy and sister. I'm going to talk about cousins and uncles and other aunts who were bootleggers. In other words, there's a whole narrative, if you will, historical character. There's a story to my life. I was born into a story. I didn't create a story all on my own. So that's the kind of thing that I think he's speaking to. Also, what is very important to McIntyre is he says that liberalism, now when he uses the word liberalism, he's talking about classical economic thought and the politics associated with it. He's not talking about necessarily the kind of liberalism you might associate it with it when you mean progressive. That's a distinction I don't want to get into tonight because it'd take us a while. But what he's saying is that this kind of capitalist discourse cannot account for tradition. Where is tradition in this rational economic individual? And in its pursuit of utility, is that all we ever do? I know some of you pretty well, and I know good and well there were times in which you gave up self-interest to pursue something you didn't even know whether you could get it done. And I've stayed up with enough of you to know that you give yourself all the time to things that aren't necessarily in your self-interest, So those kinds of questions in terms of of that kind of a view. Let me say another piece about it. There's a wonderful researcher named Antonio Damasio, Damasio. I won't spell this because you're going to get it anyhow. He wrote a book called Descartes' Era. And one of the things that he finds in that is the Homo economicus. He says that means that rational, self-interested, autonomous individual. He says about the only place we really find somebody like that is someone who's been brain damaged. He's reflecting neurological research at that point. I also love Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. Now, Kahneman, and Tversky, they got Nobel Prizes and the rest. And I'm indebted here to Sophia Rosenfield. I have read Kahneman's book, but she so well summarized their basic point. I think I'll just use her summary if you're okay. She said, she reports that after decades of research, most famously that of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, and their views have become widely accepted. They find this in their studies: the ability of any one of us to choose what's in our best interest is severely limited. All right. In fact, it seems that we routinely overestimate what we know, that we fail to predict what we will want in the future, and that we are inconsistent about our preferences. We value objects we possess over the ones we lack in ways that don't make any objective sense. And having better or more extensive information doesn't seem to improve matters. All right. That's because when making choices, we also tend to ignore facts that don't jibe with the outcome we desire. In fact, we often focus on irrelevant information. Now, folks, I'm reporting here years of research by these folks. Okay, this isn't something they just dreamed up one day when they had stomach issues. We see patterns where they don't exist, and we get distracted by our fleeting emotions. Then, if the possibilities are presented differently, our choices will shift accordingly, suggesting that on top of it all, we're easily manipulated by those in the business of manufacturing situations bloated with options. By and large, when it comes to choice, the impulsive, unreflective parts of the brain dominate the analytic parts. That's a kind of a quick summary of their 500-page book when it comes to choice and decision, okay? Let me say, too, that one of the things that free enterprise market language says is that if you allow this free market to work and these self-interested individuals to make their free choices, that it results in the greatest good of the greatest number. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this unless you want to, but I believe that a Christian view is not the greatest view of the greatest number. I think a Christian view is the greatest good of all. And when I look at the history, the scripture, and the history of ethical thought in the church, I find that the common good is a major, major commitment in scripture and in the history of the church. I got another lecture on Paul. We'll do another time where I make that case on the basis of some very good New Testament scholars, not me. And right now we won't do that. I love something about free choosers. I love something that Iris Murdoch once says. We are not free choosers. We are benighted creatures stuck in a reality whose complexity we are overwhelmingly tempted to deform by fantasy. So she's an Irish-born British author and philosopher. Or Saul Bellow once said, a good American makes propaganda for whatever existence has forced him to become. Now, I am not trying to remove any sense of freedom in a human being, but I am just trying to suggest some of the complexity when you begin to think that there are, these autonomous free individuals who pursue their self-interest rationally. So that's one piece. A second piece has to do with the inequality in income and wealth. A good economy is supposed to serve a society broadly and widely, I would contend. I think that's an ethical claim. I believe I'm prepared to defend it. Here are these stats, and I'll try not to overwhelm you with statistics, but Thomas Frank is a Kansas boy. You remember him? He did a book called What's the Matter with Kansas? But he found these data. These data, I believe, go back 3 years, maybe 4. The numbers may have changed some, but the basic pattern is very much with us. He says this, let me say them slowly so you can get them. He says from 1930 to 1980, the bottom 90% of the population, bottom 90%, 1930 to 1980, took home 70% of the gross income gains, all right? Bottom 90% got 70%. From 1980 to the present, now this is back 4 years ago, the bottom 90% of the population pocketed none of this growth, okay? None of this growth. And he also reports this, the 10% of the top of America's income pyramid now averages almost 9 times the income. Now we're talking income here, the income of the bottom 90%. That is a profoundly unequal society. Here's another one on income. The top 1% has 38 times that of the bottom 90%. And hear this, the top 1/10 of 1% has 184 times what the bottom 90% receives. Now, those are income. Wealth is worse, and that's typically true. The top 10% of the people in the country have 76% of the wealth. The bottom half wealth has 1% of the total. The 26th to 50th percentile, if you take these percentiles in quarters, okay, 0 to 25, 26 to 50, 51 to 75, 76 to 100, the top at the top. But that second, that would be a quintile. That second quintile, all right, averaged just $36,000 in total family wealth. The bottom fourth, all right, I said quintile, it's a quartile. The bottom fourth has a negative $13,000 in wealth. In other words, they owe money. They owe money. Right? Let's look at billionaires for a minute. And here I'm reporting the work of Chuck Collins, who's at the Institute for Policy Studies. A word about Chuck Collins. Chuck Collins was an heir to one of the big fortunes in the country. I'm sorry, that's escaping me right now. He gave up his wealth and devoted himself to things like the Institute for Policy Studies. It's a very interesting story, and I would call a real instance of witness. But he did an article called Billionaire Bonanza in 2020. Further title is Wealth Windfalls, Tumbling Taxes, and Pandemic Profiteers. And he began tracking billionaire wealth gains during COVID while unemployment surged. Got the picture? Unemployment is going up, and then he's studying the wealth gains of billionaires. Here's what he found. And he teamed up with an outfit called Americans for Tax Fairness to track the wealth growth. This report summarizes the extraordinary growth in wealth of we now have 657 billionaires. This number comes from Forbes magazine, March 18, 2021. Listen to the highlights of that report. The combined wealth of the nation's 657 billionaires increased more than 1.3 trillion, not million, not billion, trillion, increased 1.3 trillion, or they increased their wealth 44.6% since the pandemic lockdowns began. You got the picture? Over these same 12 months, more than 29 million Americans contracted the virus, and more than 535,000 people died from it. As billionaire wealth soared, almost 80 million lost work between March 21, 2020 and March 20, 2021, and 18 million were collecting unemployment on February 27, 2021. In other words, we've got tremendous growth in the big billionaire wealth categories, while we've got millions of people struggling with unemployment through the pandemic. Here's another piece. There are 43 newly minted billionaires since the beginning of the pandemic, when there were, quote, only 614 billionaires. All right. The increase in the combined wealth Now, these are the top 15 billionaires. The increase in the combined wealth of the 15 billionaires with the greatest growth in absolute wealth was $563 billion, or 82%. Tremendous growth. In fact, the wealth growth of just those 15 billionaires, just 15, represented over 40% of the wealth growth among all billionaires. We're talking about here people like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg. Now, so tremendous inequalities of wealth, and the expansion of a huge, I would say, billionaire group of people in our society. Now, while that's going on, let me name another piece, and I call it welfare, WALTH-fair. We've heard of welfare all of our lives. I've been hearing about it all my lives. And I typically hear it about so-called welfare queens, who are often Black, and how they're misspending government money and the rest. You know how much of that you've heard. One person apparently made quite a move running for president by talking about a welfare queen. I want to talk about welfare. And here I recommend David K. Johnston's book, Free Lunch. That book is a few years old now, but the basic pattern continues. So I want to talk about welfare kings and to some extent welfare queens. What Johnston says is we've got corporate socialism at the top and raw market forces down below for the people who are poor and you're poor. And Johnston provides the research that shows that the super rich rely on public handouts and wasteful entitlements. I'd urge you to read that book at your leisure at some point. Who's got leisure in this room? Listen briefly to Walmart. Walmart received subsidies of $1 billion and change when the corporation began. And the estimates are that Walmart has received a total of $14 billion in subsidies. Okay. Oxfam America, that's an outfit you might want to put in your computer, and because they do good research, and I think it's reliable and honest work. Hear what they say about the 50 largest companies they study. Those 50 largest companies got back $27 in federal loans, loan guarantees, and bailouts for each dollar they paid in taxes. Not only that, these 50 largest companies spent $2.6 billion on lobbying to get back almost $11.2 trillion in federal loans, loan guarantees, and bailouts. And then they say this: each taxpayer would have to pay $1,026 in taxes annually to compensate for this tax dodging by corporations and wealthy persons. Here's a statistic that just blows my mind. I did not know that in 1952 in this country, corporations paid 32% of the federal budget. They now pay 9%, and that's going down. So they paid almost a third of the budget back in 52. They're now paying under 10%. And the so-called tax reform enacted by Donald Trump and the Congress in 2018 furthered that disparity. All right. Here's another one I find interesting. This has to do with the hourly compensation of the median worker. Now, you know what a median worker is. That means 50% of the cases are above, 50% below. the inflation adjusted hourly compensation of the median worker rose 8.7%, or 0.2% annually, with essentially all of this growth occurring between 1995 and 2002. I need to say that again. In other words, their adjusted hourly compensation rose 8.7%, say in the last 40 years, and that's only 0.2% annually. Now, this speaks to the issues of what? Income, wealth, and the kind of productivity that working people in this country are providing on the one hand, but the lack of their participation in wages, income, that would represent the kind of contribution they actually make. I think that's the point of the thing. What we're also experiencing are large concentrations of power in the market. And that means we have very large corporations that have tremendous impact on social policy, legislation, and the rest. It's a known fact that the disparity between what the American people want and what the Congress, enacts on the one hand, and also even in Missouri, you have situations where the people want one thing, significant majorities of them, and our state legislature votes otherwise. That's also true in Kansas. And I dare say, I haven't been in Arizona in about 10 years, John, but I'd say it's true in Arizona as well. Let me say this too, following that. There has always been a kind of a contradiction between democracy and capitalism. If you go back and read Adam Smith's, Wealth of Nations, and it's interesting, that was published in 1776. But one of the things that Adam Smith worries about in that volume is what happens when businessmen can get the kind of wealth and power that they can use that to ensure advantage in the market. I mean, he warns us about that even back then. So it's been around a while. All right. Listen to Martin Gilens. Gilens is an economist. He's a political scientist at Princeton University, and Benjamin Page, who's a political scientist at Northwestern. Now, hear the magnitude of this research. They studied 1,779 policy issues. Here's what they found. The preferences of the average American, they have a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy. You hear what they're saying? The average American had little to no impact on these 1,779 policy issues. They say, these two political scientists, they say there's a negative relationship between the most influential business-oriented groups and the wishes of the average citizen. Again, economic elites, they say, have far more singular influence on policy change than do the preferences of the average citizens. What I'm trying to suggest, folks, is we have government of the rich, by the rich, for the rich. Okay. In fact, what they found, Gilens and Page, was that the only time that Congress tends to vote with the citizenry is when the citizens want the same thing as wealth. There's another piece to be said here, and I can't spend time on it. Let me refer you to something. My former colleague, and many of you know him, Paul Jones, did a book called Remnant Christianity, published this year. And on page 123 following, he discusses the ecological devastation being brought on by the kind of market economies that now operate in the world. And Jonesy has several pages there that are just excellent. I think we know that an economy that depends on continual growth, operating as our economy presently does, is a major, major problem in terms of the environment, and is headed clearly in a direction of ecological devastation if we don't turn it around. So those are kind of the main things I wanted to bring up. There are plenty of other things to discuss, but I think maybe it'd be good to get you into the conversation. So what kind of comments or questions do you have?
Tex, this is Ed.
Yeah.
I've been wondering about this wealth inequality. And I mean, I grew up in a farm family where fair was fair.
Yeah.
But this isn't fair.
No.
But I wondered what kind of story or rhetoric or narrative could we spin so as to begin shaping public consciousness about this whole thing? I just marvel at how public media, investigative reporters can uncover all this crap, and then nobody does anything about it. It fades away. But what have you thought? What kinds of narrative or rhetoric, to what kinds of words are those systems vulnerable?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. A lot of people are trying to solve it. Let me just express what some of my direction is without trying to make the case that this is the direction. And because, as you know, it's an enormously difficult challenge for us. But two or three things. One of the things that I'm doing right now, I don't have that together yet, but some of you know that I am very critical of Bill Clinton. I'm very critical of Obama, and we'll see what Biden does. Now, when I say something like that, I don't mean to suggest that I'm exonerating the Republican Party. In fact, I would say to you, the Republican Party has been even worse. All right. But what we've got are two parties that are really dependent upon huge campaign finance. And now he must have had some reason, but Mr. Obama, for example, called in the Wall Street people during that, after that 2007-2008 crisis. And he told them, you don't need to worry. I'm not going to have you arrested. You're going to be okay. We're going to survive this. That's what he told them. And there was criminal activity in the market during that time. There's no question about it. The Democratic Party now, folks, I know most of you, and I suspect most of you lean moderate to left. Okay, that's why I'm talking about Democrats. And I'll come to the conclusion. I think the Democratic Party has become way too dependent upon college-educated people. It's become way too dependent upon the big tech companies in California. A guy like Clinton listened way too much to Larry Summers and that whole neoliberalism that basically believed in a deregulation, cutting taxes on the rich, anti-union stuff. At least they weren't pro-union, and so on. I mean, that kind of, I've got more on that, but that kind of a stance that they've taken. And I think there are a couple of things. The Democratic Party, the good part of the Democratic Party is that you've got an awful lot of women in this country who have their heads on straight. I'm sorry, but I think that's right. I mean, I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to suck up to women here, but I think they do have their heads on right. And the Democratic Party has been in some ways responsive to that. What the Democratic Party is not doing sufficiently is addressing Black people and other people of color, and it's not addressing working class whites. So one of the things we've got to, can I say it this way? I hear progressive people saying absolutely wretched things about working class white people. Friends, we've got to stop that. What we need to be doing is finding out where they're real, and they've got some interests. And I'm not talking about some abstract sets of interests in a free market. I'm talking about your job, your family, the kind of taxes we've got, the people that are cut free from taxes, basically, and the rest. But to begin to talk, our rural America, Ed, I know you, by the way, folks, Ed Kyle is a specialist in ministry in rural America. He knows probably as much about it as anybody I know. Let me report some things to you, and this relates to your question, Ed. The total output of the U.S. farming sector, all of our farms in the United States, is 2.5 times now what it was in 1955. Got the picture? Farms in this country are producing 2.5 times what they did in 1955. But the median on-farm income averaged a negative $1,569 per year from 1996 to 2017. What am I saying? You got a lot of people who are working jobs in order to stay on the farm because they aren't making money with the farm. Ed knows that. You know it in spades, I dare say, Ed. Listen to this. More than half of farm households now lose money from farming. They work other jobs to keep farming. This is the work of Nick Saxon in an article that appeared in The Nation back in March of 2020. The role of CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations. They inflict damages in stages. This is part of that vertical integration, major corporation, concentration of power issue I was raising. In 1973, in 1973, 90% of hogs were sold on competitive markets. Today, 90% of hog farming is controlled by large, vertically integrated meat packing corporations. What's happening to the family farm out there? Do you wonder why we're closing so many churches in rural America? What Saxon says is because we're hollowing out the economy for family farmers, small business people, and folks, small banks. I didn't know this, but do you know that small banks serve a community? And certainly in rural America, that's his finding, serve a rural community better than a large corporate bank. What I'm trying to say is, hey, we might have some allies here in rural America, farm families, small business. Folks, we need to be working with small businesses. They're getting their lunch eaten, so many of them. We need to be working with small business. So first thing I'm kind of saying is, hey, we've got some stuff going on in this economy. It's eating the lunch of some people where we ought to be allies. We got together the Black community here in Kansas City. They provided the space, and we had farmers connected with the Missouri Rural Crisis Center, which is a good outfit in Columbia. They came in, they brought food, Black community folk gathered, and there was really something good going on there in terms of the potential for, building an alliance there with people of color, with farmers in Missouri. So I'd say a major piece is we've got to get some clarity on what's happening to people so we can build some allies among these people of color, white working class folk, white farmers. Women have typically been voting pretty well in this country. What we got to watch out for is gerrymandering. And by the way, people, Democrats do that too. It's not just Republicans. So, I guess I'm trying to say, don't be a shield for the Democratic Party. Put demands on those guys and women, and some of them are women. All right, but build that kind of alliance. I think, and then I'll stop. This is too long. I think organizing down on the ground is about the only hope we really got. And Trinity Church God, I love y'all, the way y'all have worked in organizing here and the way you participate in so many places. I think the churches can play an important part, and by sharing what's happening to so many people down on the ground. Um, so that kind of organizing, that kind of clarity about what's happening. I've got family members that voted for Donald Trump because of his tax cuts. You know what they got? A pair of shoes out of the deal. A pair of shoes out of the deal. So I spend my time trying to
Yeah, I paid more taxes.
talk about where they're getting screwed. What'd you do, Ed? You paid more taxes?
I did, yeah. Mine went up 40%.
Well, he wasn't working for you. I'm sorry, that I'll try to be shorter, but you understand that there's a lot that has to go on in this. But other comments or questions, you make your own speech. You don't have to ask a question, of course. Yes, John.
But it seems to me that the public has bought into the system. Let me tell you about a apartment owner. He had 83 housing units. And at the beginning of the pandemic, when everybody was worried about making their payments and all, he actually organized, brought his people in and trained them how to get subsidies for their rent, even before they even needed it, and then raise the rent so they could get more. So it looks like we're buying into it as a people. It was just the most horrendous, awful thing I had ever heard about, taking advantage of the goodness that they were trying. And I'm not sure it was good. That maybe that's the way they intended it to happen. It seems like the money they pour out to it goes back to them.
Yeah. Well, there's you got a lot of think tanks in this country, and there's a lot of big money supporting right-wing think tanks. And what those folks do, I mean, do you wonder where a 1,000-page bill that goes to the Missouri legislature, do you wonder which legislator we've got there would have written a 1,000-page piece? It comes right out of one of these think tanks. They've got people that are well-funded who sit around and think about what kind of an issue can we raise to keep people from raising the minimum wage, for example, to oppose Medicaid expansion, to be against vaccinations. You got big money doing that all the time. In Missouri, Alex, the Koch brothers, more than that, but yeah. Other comments, questions? Pardon? Yeah, Matt.
Gentleman who has a question here.
Oh, good. Thank you for watching. Is that you, Jim?
That's me. I was just wanting to make a couple of comments or whatever. One is I remember a time when unions were much stronger than today, and the working class or blue collar workers generally made quite a bit more money. And I know about that because my father worked, hauling steel. He was a member of the Teamsters, and they paid very generously and got great benefits. And where we lived, the USW, United Steelworkers Union, was known for getting their workers quite fair and high salaries for what they were doing. And then I had relatives in another part of the country and Appalachia who were members of United Mine Workers, and they were able to get very well compensated jobs doing that. But unfortunately, within the past 15, 20 years, the vast majority of the unionized jobs, they either went overseas or the company the companies were able to strong arm the unions to accept what they propose, or just kind of kick them out altogether. So the average person still working in those fields is maybe making, a half or maybe even half of what they were making before. And you're talking about, the coal mines are exposed to even more silica dust, which
Yeah.
is increasing the rate of black lung disease, which, by the way, Senator McConnell, who's from Eastern Kentucky, which is one of the prime areas for coal mining, voted against increased funding for black lung disease. But in recent years or so, I kind of have seen a movement back towards where, unions have been striking certain companies, and then they have succeeded in getting salary increases, fairer contracts and such. So I'm hoping that's, swinging back in a positive direction again.
Mhm.
And then the second point I wanted to make is Democrats, I swear, can really be their own worst enemy. And I could see where, the party has often been taken over by elitists, and they, and certain, they may be, quite wealthy, as a matter of fact, but those sort of differentiate between the good, poor, and
Mhm.
oppressed people, like, minorities. And I know some people in St. Louis who do this. So it's like, they pat themselves on the back for working within the Black community over there.
Mhm.
But anytime, say, poverty in the Ozarks comes up, or whatever social economic disadvantage is coming out over there, they just dismiss them as poor white trash.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, and in their book is that there's nothing worse you can be than white trailer trash, and it's very alienating. And of course, we had Hillary Clinton, what, 8 years ago or so, referred to certain group of people as basket of deplorables,
Yeah.
and which, unfortunately, some of my relatives in West Virginia, very much took that to heart,
Oh, yeah.
and they all voted for Trump,
Yeah.
and which really was not in their best interest. So that's basically saying the 2 points I want to make is that Democrats can be very out of touch, or they could favor one group over the other because it's like the fashionable thing to do,
Mhm.
even though they may not have to, associate with, the inner city people of, for example, St. Louis on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And they could put down, poor white people as often as they like. So that's basically just what I wanted to say. I really
Yeah.
hope that the union movement is coming back strong,
Yeah.
because that's the only thing that'll help us.
Let me say to those of you in Kansas City, for example, Jobs with Justice, for example, is working very hard to do union organizing, and Stand Up KC, for example, is another organization we've got here in the city, working for $15 an hour, and a union for fast food workers, among others. So we've got some organizing activity going on here, and there has been some relative success with that. Let me just tell you how far we've got to go. At one point, we had unions. This number's jumping in my head, so don't trust me altogether, but I think the magnitude is about right. I believe there was a time when almost a third of our working people were unionized, and now it's down between 7% and 9%, depending on how you count. So if you kind of see that the way I do, that when you've got somebody with power here and somebody without it on the bottom, or relatively without power, then you're going to have injustice. I just have never seen that happen, and otherwise. And so somehow we've got to begin to build connections with people, relationships with people. I got on a chat room thing the other day. I try to stay off those things because they're many of them are toxic. But this person was describing self as a progressive and described white working class people as knuckle dragging, cousin effing, was it gorillas?
No, Neanderthals.
Neanderthals. That was the description. I mean, does classism not count anymore? Hey, I busted my tail in the oil field 5 summers. I've been around some folks. I know that working people can be as racist as anybody else. So, that's not my point. My point also is if we don't start taking the time to do some of the kind of work and get these coalitions. Listen, if you got people of color and white working folk together, you could basically control the elections in this country. Now, I don't know that I want control in terms of some absolute sense, but yes, please, Dallas.
How do you, in the last 5 years, probably 10 years, economics haven't been the deciding factor. It's been cultural issues that have elected the right.
Right.
And so are working with unions, is that going to deal with that issue?
Well, let me say 2 things about that. One, I think that's exactly right, that a lot of people there vote their culture and they don't vote their interests, is what people say.
Yeah.
Let me say a couple of things about that. One of them is that there are a good many working class whites that just don't have much use for people that went to the university. I mean, I've run into that all my life, and part of the reason for that, I contend, is the fault of the people that went to the university. We often don't learn how to talk the way white working folk talk. We have an air of I know and I understand and you don't. You see, if you feel like you're constantly attacked, particularly at the point of your culture, then you're going to be mad as hell. I'm sorry, this is where I am. I find that an awful lot of working people, when they talk about stuff that counts, they talk about it in family terms, and you can talk about just any issue in the world with them if you put it in family terms. I remember I was talking about homosexuality with somebody in my hometown of Brookhaven, and he was saying some things I didn't agree with, I didn't like. And I said back, wait a minute, what about Charles? Come on, what about Charles? And he said back to me, look, I don't care whether he's gay or not. He's our gay. I don't care if they're an SOB. They're our SOB. You hear the difference? And I think that there's a way in the logic, and I see that's that academic BS. There's a way in the way folk think and talk to talk about these issues that is sensitive to them, appreciative of the culture, and does not kind of lord over, and that it's that kind of a thing. Training our clergy there is so desperately important, I think, in terms of working in that kind of a setting. The way I preach at Trinity would certainly not be the way I'd preach if I were in a working class white church. I don't mean I wouldn't deal with issues. I mean, just the way I'd approach them would be radically different. So they do vote culture. And a lot of that culture is resistance to an educated elite that they identify with left. That's where we've got to do the job of learning how to talk and the language they use and the way they approach issues in terms of family and place. Place is awfully important. Place is so, you know, a neighborhood in the city or a rural community or, you know, or country folks. We've got to learn to do that. We got to learn to do that. And I think that's the way to approach the identity issue.
So I go home to a town of 300 people. And at one time, even poor people considered themselves not low class at all. They dressed up. They may have one suit, but they dressed up. Yeah. They talked with good English. They didn't, I mean, it's totally different now. Totally different. And it's extremely hard to relate to somebody who has made a decision about their life to stay the way they are.
Yeah. Well, how is it different?
Just if you look, I look at people on Facebook that are from our town, and it looks exactly like people going to Trump rallies. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it would be totally the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're on Facebook with them, they are the same.
Yeah. Janet, you've got a comment?
How'd you know?
You raised your hand. I'm not hearing you. You're not. Yeah, you're
working on it. Can you hear me now?
Can, yes.
Okay, well, I got invited to a small church last week that is talking about leaving the United Methodist denomination.
Yeah.
And the kind of people that, and I'm not trying to label those people, and yet they were the people you're exactly talking about, the people, and they were talking about they're all one family in this church. Local pastor, and I was just amazed. I grew up in that, but I guess I've moved away from it long enough that I had to take a sucker and stick it in my mouth to keep my mouth shut, because I just didn't know how I could reach any of those people in that congregation.
Yeah. You know, was this a rural congregation or a town congregation? Which was it?
Small town congregation.
Yeah. I tell you, the material from Shaxson that I was talking about, Nick Shaxson, what's going on in small rural America. I find if you begin to talk with people, those kinds of statistics and data, and if you know enough of them to be able to tell the stories of their lives, that's really a bridge across that chasm between you often. You know, I don't know. I've probably talked in 600 small churches in small towns, but it's just so clear. I can't go in there and talk the way I would talk tonight, you know.
Right. What was the name of that book?
Shaxson, it's not a book, it's actually an article. And I've got it referenced in the materials I'll send you after tonight. I'll just shoot these two. Let's see, Matt, how do I get this outline of this stuff to them tonight? You know, let's see, where is
how about if you just send it to me, I'll have MA when she resends the recording out.
Oh, okay.
I'll have the stuff come with it.
Yeah, and I'll try to find that Shaxson thing. I was quoting from a 3x5 card I've got here when I was telling you that, but it's in the Nation mag. In fact, if you go to your browser, if I can find it again, yeah, here it is. If you go to your browser and look up Nick, N-I-C-K, Shaxson, S-H-A-X-O-N, It was in The Nation magazine, which is something I read every time it's issued. It's one of the best in the country. It's March 2 through 9, 2020. And there's more I didn't tell you about, but the work he does there in terms of the hollowing out of rural America, small town America, is just terrific. And I did a thing up at the seminary in Dubuque here a year or so ago, and I talked about a number of issues, but I was really leading with Shaxson. I mean, you know, and after it was over, the woman who was in charge of the thing, this seminary, but it had a lot of church folks as well as students, you know. But I was leading with Shaxson. And later she told me, and I was dealing with a bunch of issues, you can imagine. But she told me later, she said, you know, you were walking a very fine line. And I said, well, did they turn me off? She said, no, they didn't, but you were very close. And it was a sheer fact that I was working with Shaxson, you know, and I was defending rural American, small town American. My God, why don't we want to defend them? You know, they're getting their lunch eaten too. They're getting screwed over. Why don't we want to defend small business people? You know, they're getting their lunch eaten. And I know you got small business people that defend big corporate America, and it blows my mind, you know, but nevertheless, Pam, you got a comment.
Yeah, I would like to, you know, I'm an old child of the 60s, lived in Harvard Square.
Yeah.
What if we all didn't pay our taxes? Is there ever a way we could have a tax revolt? I mean, you know, we're all paying at least probably 25%. These corporations pay nothing. And I just keep thinking, why can't we get all the rest of us just to not to pay ours?
I don't know, but I think it would be easier for us to organize down on the ground around the kind of interests that we can articulate where we've already got the data. You know, I think it'd be hard to mount that kind of a movement. I don't know that, but I think it would be.
I'm sure it would. Tex, I don't know about other people, but I'm so discouraged by our Missouri government.
Oh, it's mindless.
It's mindless, is right.
Yeah,
I just want to say, Pam, if you don't pay your taxes, I'll come visit you in jail.
Good, Sharon, appreciate it.
yeah, yeah. Hey, Sharon, you're wanting in here, friend. Can't hear.
Sharon Ruby, I think is who you're talking to, isn't it?
Yeah, Sharon Ruby. Yeah.
There I am.
There you are.
Yeah, still back on the question about the statement about the average person having no influence that you said on policy issues. We have no influence on a lot of things. And then Ed asked the question, well, what's it going to take to change the narrative? So where are you? And I hear your talk about organizing on the ground and agree with all of that. Where are you then when it comes to does the average vote count anymore? You know, we have a son who he didn't vote in the last 2 elections, and I would talk to him until I was blue in the face, and he says, Mom, it doesn't make any difference.
Yep.
I'm not voting or not. So does it?
Yes, it does, but it varies.
That's what I tell him.
Yeah, it varies. For example, in Kansas City, we have a pretty good voting population.
Yes, we do.
Where we're getting, and particularly around Trinity Church, I mean, our folks are about 72% voting on what some would call a progressive agenda. I mean, it's really high there. I think we voted 2/3 for raising the minimum wage. I think Medicaid expansion was high. We've also got a lot of organizing efforts going on there. Let me say, I've said something given Tversky and Kahneman about people don't follow their self-interest. And I think it's true when you think about self-interest the way the free market people do. What I'd like for you to do is think about self-interest a different way. The Alinsky organizing effort learned from Hannah Arendt. Do you remember her? She was an important political thinker here of the 20th century. She works with the notion that interest comes from the Latin inter esse, between beings. And the point that the IAF has made now for years is that asking somebody their individual self-interest is one thing, but when you get those people in relationship, they begin to work on their interests together. And you're also building bonding and building identity. And so what I'm trying to suggest is that kind of down on the ground organizing does indeed, it's not that kind of interest you run into with a the rational autonomous individual, but that kind of interest where people are focused around what matters to them about their families, their homes, schools, the churches and the rest. And they begin to organize, and the kind of interests that emerge there are really interests between them. They begin to build solidarity with and begin to build identity with. I'm trying to say that if we could get that kind of organizing going in rural America, small town America, we've got it going in a lot of places across the country. In fact, one of my dear friends is a guy named Joe Rubio. He's an organizer for IAF, and he works with, I don't know, there must be 15 or 20 organizing efforts he's working with in the western part of the United States. And Paul Turner is another of their top people working with, and now teaching a course at St. Paul, for example, on community organizing. But I think we've got to get people together around their interest understood that way. For example, your interest is what you give a damn about, what you care about, what you burn about, and when you begin to find it, when I've walked into a room with people that were, they were racist, maybe not, maybe worse than that, they were also bigots. But when they began to talk about their mama and their daddy and their children and their schools and their churches and their community and what was going on in them, the conversation changes. And when they're with people who are coming from another place and they begin to see that they got some stuff going on together, the conversation changes. And when you get people working in that kind of a setting, it's a different world. I'm just trying to say that there are ways we can work with this stuff that I just don't think we've tried enough. I haven't talked with Trinity about this. I'll be leaving Trinity. I'll be retiring for the 5th time. Sorry about that. In June 30th, and I'll continue to work in organizing and so forth. One of the things I want to do is I live in the North, and I'm concerned about what's going on in the Northland of Kansas City, particularly above Berry Road. Peggy and I are talking about going to Plattwood's church, and I'm talking about teaching a Sunday school class there every Sunday, so that I can begin to build. I'd like to see us put together an IF organizing effort north of the river, because we've got an awful lot of reactionary stuff going on up here, and just see where that goes, Don't know whether that'll work or not. And I sure can't do it all, because one of the reasons why I'm retiring is I just can't work 60 and 70 hours anymore a week. So, but
do I hear you saying, Tex, that the organizing and the bringing the common interest together in the organizing comes before getting the vote out? Are you saying that?
No, I think we try to get the vote out anyhow. But one of the basic things these kind of organizing efforts do is get the vote out.
Right.
So, for example, one of the things I know that Jobs with Justice, which is a group that Trinity's working with, they're trying to get the vote out, for this election.
Right.
So, no, it's not one of those things you do this instead of that. It's one of those things you got to do them both. You got to do them both. Yeah. No, I have not given up on the vote. And when an informed citizen turns out, they tend to win. We've had a good thing here in Missouri where we would have these citizens referendums. Sam Mann in our town was a great advocate for that. We got some really good stuff done here, and our legislature keeps voting some of that down. They can't vote it all down. Now they're trying to either eliminate it or make it much more difficult, because they see how effective it is. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'll be interested to know what we can do at the courts if they try to pull that off. You understand what I'm saying? They're trying to make it much harder to get a citizens referendum And you got some of these people in Missouri and Missouri legislators saying the citizens don't know what's good for them. We do. You know, that kind of idiocy. I'm sorry. But I think it's true. Comments, questions?
I got another,
Okay, Jim.
or comment rather. Now, looks like everyone is sort of well read here. Did you read the book Hillbilly Elegy yet?
I did. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, me too. And it's like I identified zero with the author, whose family seemed much more dysfunctional than mine. And also, he is running as a hardcore Trumper for the U.S. Senate in Ohio.
Yeah.
In the seat that's being vacated. As a result of that, I've probably given more money, which isn't that much, but more money to the Democrat than anyone else.
Yeah.
Senator, because that's a, you know, prime seat that could probably flip blue. But I didn't like his approach. That is that what you saw? That basically, you know,
he's a
those
right
people
wing
in Eastern
reactionary.
Kentucky, you know, that had to pull themselves up by the bootstraps.
He's a right wing reactionary. And what he confuses is the addictive culture of his upbringing with white working class culture in Appalachia.
Yep.
He collapses them into one another. I think that's just nuts. And I haven't known a lot of Appalachian folks, but I've known a few. And when you run into somebody who really represents that culture, there's some awful good stuff in that culture, you know, and I just don't feel like he picks that up and tends to conflate the two. I've got real pride. I started reading that book. I was really excited about it. And then every page I'd turn, I said, oh, dear God, what happened to this boy? And, and he went to Yale. Somebody failed him, you know.
I think he went to Stanford too, and then he made millions out in San Francisco, and somewhere he became Republican, and you know, I guess moved back to Ohio to run for Senate.
I think he's running for office somewhere. That's the last word I got on him.
Yeah, U.S. Senator from Ohio. Hope he doesn't get elected.
Oh, yeah. We got a lot like him already.
Yep.
Other comments, questions? We're getting down there to the time, but want to make sure that anybody who hasn't had a chance to say something gets a chance to say it. I am not the party line here. There are a number of points of view in this group that I'm aware of. I think I like almost all of them. Your comment would be welcome.
Tex, I was just wondering if you have followed Richard Reich, if you know much about him.
He's one of my favorite capitalist economists.
Okay, thank you. I follow him daily, and I just kind of. You know,
it's Robert, isn't it? Robert Reich.
Robert, yeah, Robert. I'm sorry, I did say Robert. Yeah,
I tell you,
he testified. I think he testified yesterday.
Oh, did he? I didn't see that. Joe Stiglitz is a fine economist, and this is a book that's in the bibliography I sent you. It's called Rewriting the Rules of the American Economy. Now, he is a capitalist, so I want you to know I have provided you with some capitalists in this time. He's a capitalist. What I love about this book is he talks about what's wrong with the economy, and then in the back he gives you all the research he uses to establish the claims he makes in the book. He's also a Nobel Prize winner. It's called Joseph Stiglitz, S-T. Well, you'll get that from me, but Stiglitz, S-T-I-G-L-I-T-Z, Nobel Prize winner. And it's a readable book. Can you believe that, by an economist? And I think but he, and then Paul Krugman and Robert Reich, there's an awful lot they do that I like among the people who are capitalism. Yeah. I tell you, another book I just love. In fact, I should have been doing something else, but this book by, do y'all know Carl Polanyi's book, The Great Transformation? It's a classic text, published 1944, and I was working through a chapter right before we got together. That's why I was a little late, and it's still so blooming relevant. You know, it's a classic. We hear a lot about the budget and the deficit, and Catherine. I hate it being 87 years old and I can't remember names, but I got 3x5 cards on her. Yeah. I'm sorry, it's not Catherine. It's Kelton, Kelton. She did a book called the fiscal debt, the fiscal
Myth.
The fiscal myth. The fiscal debt myth. Well, I got all these cards, and the deficit myth. There it is, Stephanie Kelton, the deficit myth. And that thing is excellent. I was talking to Congressman Cleaver the other day. She tells a story about him in her book. And I said, tell me, what do you think of Stephanie Kelton's book? He said, I think she's dead right. I think she's dead right. So it is having some influence with the Congress, although, you know, not all Congress people are like Congressman Cleaver, whom I tend to appreciate a great deal. But yes, Donna.
Just a word. I've been working with the wonderful folks at Trinity and in some of the actions that they're taking. And you know, it's easy to get discouraged when we look at this big picture and, you know, does our vote count anymore, or what can we do? And I know as a retired person, or the most precious thing I have is my time. And I've been going and joining in on the actions and the efforts of workers to organize into unions, mainly through Jobs with Justice and Stand Up KC and what they're doing. But, you know, something pretty marvelous is happening. Starbucks, there is beginning to have some of their locations unionized. We've stood with the workers at 2 or 3 of them here in Kansas City. Amazon. There is a site that's a David and Goliath story. You know, Amazon workers are organizing and have been successful in one location and working in others. So, you know, there are things that we can do, and where I feel like I'm closest to really being effective is standing with these folks who are being very brave. At one of the Starbucks locations, there was a lot of intimidation going on. And those workers were standing as one of them was speaking, and they were scared. You know, they were scared. And, you know, but there were, you know, UAW, other unions, faith community folks. We have to work together. We're stronger together. And, you know, the churches need to step out and be leaders in this effort. So that's one of, I'm so grateful to be able to work with some of my Trinity friends. And, but in all of your communities, I'm sure there are grassroots things that you can take advantage of and get involved.
Trinity is the finest church experience of my life. It is, you know, and I've been around the church a long time now. So it's the finest church experience of my life. And I can't say enough about it. If I were 80 years ago, I'd stay a while longer. But we need somebody now who can really make another jump the next 5 years. But I love Trinity. Let's see, there was one other thing. I know we're about out of time. I will send you this outline through Matt. And two things. One, we were talking about working with, working class whites, or what I call cultural traditionalists. This is, I apologize if this is just scandalous promotion, but I did a book called Working Class Rage back in 2018. And the last 75 pages of that book, skip the first 200 or whatever, 100, whatever it is, and read the back 75. I deal with cultural traditionalists and working with and how to and so forth. That's some of my best work on it, I think. I also did a book called Doing Ministry. Well, the title is Living with Will Rogers, Uncle Remus, and Minnie Pearl. And it's Doing Ministry in an Oral Culture. That also addresses some of these questions. So that. Now, what else do we have here? Oh, we're going to do a course on Christian justice for the common good. That'll begin. Matt, do you recall exactly when that'll begin?
I believe it's Wednesday the 20th, I think is the date. Yes, the 20th.
You'll be getting notification of it, but we're going to study my book by that title, Christian Justice for the Common Good. And in there, I do some work with organizing and the rest, but also some of the theological rationale for. So if you're free, we'd love to have you. That'll be on Wednesday night too. It'll be an hour and a half. I think, is the time the same, 6:30 to 8? Matt, I think so.
That's correct.
Yeah. And okay. And that'll go 6 weeks. So, hey, I appreciate so much all of you showing up. And Matt, thank you for your good work on this. Appreciate it. And may you go in peace, and may the righteousness of God just goose us in the direction we need to go. Okay.